And it's all because of the enhancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you see me here on top of Table Mountain with my hands up in the air and I'm saying, yeah, I'm here. I can see above the clouds and I can see the oceans coming together. That's amazing. But you know what else? Yes.
We can't see your slides.
Ah, well now, thank you, Kimberly. Host has disabled screen sharing. You could see my slides before. I need the host to enable screen sharing for me again, please. Yes, we'll try that. But you know what? With or without slides, I can tell you how beautiful it was. I can tell you that it was amazing. I can tell you that I saw things that I'd not seen before. And I'm just going to ask if let's see here. If the host can again enable my capability for co-host. If you would set me up, Tonya Wilson, as co-host again.
I have to say you're doing a phenomenal job describing everything. So we can picture, no problem, what you're talking about.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Christy. So Christy, yes?
Yes.
Or even just
there we are. It's set. It's set. Here we go. Here we go. There we are. Great. How about that? Christy, does that give you another visual?
That works great.
Do you see DEI navigating alternative and current realities? Mm-hmm. Woohoo! There we go. I love it. Yeah, so now you really see me on top of Table Mountain. There we are. I know that Linda's like, I'd love to go to South Africa. Linda, one day you will do that. This was one of my dreams, to go there and just enjoy the time and do some other things. As someone talked about sustainability a little bit earlier and how we use the technology to engage others for things that are important. But you know what, we can absolutely, so I can go back to this place. I can go into that Oculus and I can revisit this place. This can become not only what was my current reality, but part of the alternate reality that I have. And in fact, I can even choose my own, guess what, avatar. How many of you have actually created an avatar? I want to see it in the chat. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you can be there, absolutely. So here's my avatar. This is a Tonya avatar. Now you might say, hey, Tonya, did you really choose to be in your 20s in that avatar? And I'm going to tell you, yes, I did. Even though, let me just tell you, I've been working in the area of organizational development and effectiveness for 20 plus years. That's why all of that stuff that she read about, oh, she worked there, that's why, right? Because I've been working for a long time in this space. It's an area of passion. And I like to say that if you're in this field, you're not in it just for the sake of, oh, it's just a nice vocation. You're in it for the calling. You're in it to make a difference. You're in it to impact life, and you're in it to make change. And change is what it's all about. So we can take and transport ourselves we can create this. You see, in fact, in my avatar, you saw those rocks and the mountains in Table Mountain. Now I've decided I want to just sit there for a while. I want to check out everything that's all around me. I want to enjoy just sitting in the rocks in places that I couldn't. I can do that. That's part of the capability that the technology has created. And the technology is something that's great, awesome. But we have to look at this capability of how do we use the technology? Because this is changing our world. And it's changing the way that we work in our world. It's changing the work that we do in our world. But there has to be this sense of balance between the human element and human factor and technology. This is the challenge that we have sometimes when we think about alternate realities and where we are going and how's the governance. And I just want to ask you the question. You know, I'm looking in the chat, right? Yeah, Janie, I love it. So Janie, as I think about this, I use AI right? Artificial intelligence. We use this all the time. How many of you use some type of a GPS? Anybody when you're driving? Yeah, I see some hands raised, right? Right? And how many of you get, so I use Waze here in the US. Let me just tell you, it's my favorite. You might like Google Maps or Google Navigate, that's good. And if you're outside of the US, you may have some other options. But one of the things that I know is it's tracking me, it's understanding the places that I like to stop, which is why it pops up an ad that says, do you want to stop at the next Starbucks? Right? That's because it knows me. Why? Because it's learning. That's why, Sandra, where do we go without GPS? Whatever happened to real maps? That's in the past, absolutely. What about your home security? Some of you have the ability to control your home security and look at cameras. Some of you have the ability to engage in research. Some of you are talking about the completion of your doctoral work or some of your other master's work. Well, one of the things that I know is that we use AI to help us. Now, okay, we're going to talk just for a second about anyone who might be using Chat GPT. Right? No, not right. But yes. Hyung-Jun, did I say that correctly? Did I pronounce your name? Hyung-Jun?
Yes, that's very close. Hyung-Jun, yeah.
Hyung-Jun says, yes, I use it. Absolutely. And you do. We use it all the time. Rideshare applications in the US, outside of the US. It exists, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to get around. I just want to tell you that I prefer riding to driving when people are on the opposite side of the road from the place that I learned to drive. All right? It just makes me more comfortable. But guess what? Now I just use this little device, some of you are on it right now, right? Little device. This computer that's in my hand helps me, and it knows everything. In fact, I like to think that Apple is listening to me right now. That's why when I say the next thing, oh, I've been thinking about alternate reality, and the next thing that pops up is alternate reality. You know that it's true. Okay, it's a little big brotherish. Yeah, we can say that, but it's part of how AI is developing and advancing. Help us and how we use that. Even during COVID, some of us had the ability to order groceries. And then it keeps the list. Okay, so yes, both in the US, I use Sam's and other places. And it just keeps a running list. And it says, do you want to order this? And other people who wanted this. I mean, we're using the technology all of the time, but we have to keep into perspective the fact that the way we use the technology has to be in a way that doesn't bring harm. And what's powering that technology? Because what's happening is I took you to a place that I had been. That was a reality for me, but then there's a perception. And sometimes with this technology, it's not easy to discern between the reality and what the perception is. I'm going to give you a chance to check that out. So for instance, when you look at this, what do you see? I want you to put in your chat right away. Look at this image. Tell me in the chat, what do you see? We know that it's a Black man. Two Black men, two faces. Yeah, yes. Navidita, I don't know if I said your name correctly, but that's right.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Two faces, two people with the same image. It's a little bit of an illusion, isn't it? Absolutely, Linda, yes. So it's an illusion. And sometimes it feels like that when we're thinking about the technology. There's a man facing forward, and sometimes the perceptions that we have are influenced by our view. Sometimes we're looking at two different things and we don't understand the difference between them and how did that happen and what's really true and what is not true. And that's the opportunity for us as leaders in businesses and organizations to figure out how to make AI work for the good. How do we look at it? Because it is good. But there's some things that we know that can change the world because we live in a world, let's just face it, when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, When we think about the diverse nature, which is so much about our representation and so many dimensions of diversity, I heard you talking a little bit earlier about that. And yes, it's diversity. Someone talked about neurodiversity, neurodiversities, right? And so when we're thinking about accessibility and neurodiversity and other capabilities that people have, whether they're abled or differently abled in the way that they process, whether they're organizational dimensions of diversity, global dimensions of diversity, and let's not forget the thing that we are so close to, the personality, how different we are in the way that we process and see ourselves and see others. Our realities can be different. So what are we talking about here? I've told you about the Oculus and the ability to have AI and how we use it all the time. Any other ways that you're using AI? Put it in there. Let me just see. Yeah, I love this comment, Shmuel. Shmuel? I hope I said that correctly. The question was about if alternate reality can support true and practical integration of people with mental and cognitive disabilities. I love it as an assist, as a way of creating additional capability. I mean, we see this when we start to think about the work that's done in accessibility. And I think about that from a learning perspective because I do a lot of work in that field, right? We've created, in fact, in the work that I've done with the Association for Talent Development that focuses substantially on learning and development and organizational development solutions in organizations, we created a DEI certificate program. We had to make sure that we were looking at this from the perspective of people who were neurodivergent. What does that mean? That they're processing differently, that there's, doesn't mean that they're less than. It means they're processing differently. But guess what? We all have some uniqueness. Every one of us. It's not just the most obvious. It's not just the color of our skin, the color of our hair, the way that it's not that. It's so many other things about us. And so, yes, there is a way to use the technology for enhancement. Now, let's just think about just something as simple as providing subtitles. And do you know that even in the use of AI and accessibility standards, we have found that the research essentially is saying that there are so many people who are benefiting from accessibility enhancements that don't declare or define themselves or have even had any official indication that they needed it. And yet it is helping them all along the way. We want to make this world work better. And so if we can use the technology to do that, I think that's amazing. So when we think about AI and the metaverse, right, and reality, these are the things we're talking about. So I'm gonna share something. I was thinking about my mom and my grandmother. So my grandmother used to talk about a comic strip, comics, funnies, comics in the US. And so when she was younger, she said, they had this comic, I remember when I was a kid, they had this comic strip and this man was talking on his watch. My grandmother, this was my grandmother. She said, I was talking on his watch. It was so crazy. Who would ever think you could talk on your watch, right? Guess what? You see this? I talk on this periodically, right? Some of you do too. Who has a watch that they talk on right now? Anybody? I want to see it in the chat. I'm looking for chat activity here, right? I see some hands too. That's exactly right. Some of you know you're talking on your watch, and some of you know that you are so inconspicuous with your watch that when you're in a meeting, you're just subtly scrolling. Oh, I know it's true. It's using the technology. Those are the things we're talking about is how do we use this technology? The world is changed and it's different than anything that we've seen before. How do we get there? Because Sharon's like, yeah, I love my watch. Absolutely. When we think about virtual reality, enhanced reality, when we think about AI and the evolution of it, we're using it on a regular basis, even when we think about the way that we manage talent. How do we engage? And not everyone is at the table. There's a lot of money spent in this, billions of dollars. Just AI alone, when we think about the $50+ billion, when we think about the metaverse, oh yeah, hey, did I talk about metaverse? I didn't talk about metaverse for a moment, but we will, because in the metaverse, where now you're creating a brand new world, seriously. None of you remembers before there was a WWW, World Wide Web. I remember that. Okay, so I just dated myself. I don't care. All right. I remember when we didn't have the internet. Okay, there's some people who have no clue about that. Saying to you, it was, who would imagine? I remembered when I was with AT&T and we were talking about spectrum and selling air. I said, who sells air? How do you do this? And now when we think about, my children are looking at metaverse and the companies we're talking about doing this investment, they're already buying real estate in the metaverse. What is the metaverse? It's a brand new world that you can go in and take that little avatar that I had or create other avatars. You can go in and buy and sell. People are buying real estate for billions of dollars in the metaverse. Now, any Marvel fans in here? You like Marvel comics, you like the movies, you like Avengers, anybody here? Yeah, okay, very good. So who knows about the multiverse? Anybody know about the multiverse? Let me see, yes, understand multiverse in your chat. Sarah, do you know about the multiverse, right? Arlene's like, yeah, I might know something about Janie. Yes, right? So we imagine this. What is, for those who don't know, this is a movie, this is a whole series. And they've created this opportunity to say there are multiple universes all over the place. And you can enter them and may enter them with your character, but different alter egos. And it's just quite interesting. I'm a little bit of a Marvel fan myself. And so it helps me to think about metaverse. But beyond that, what happens when you can transport yourself and look different than you do now? And who's shaping what this new world looks like? Because I want to tell you something. We haven't done such a great job with the existing world. Can I tell you that? Because there's still bias. There's still discrimination. There's still poverty. There's still all of those things. So if we have the opportunity to shape a new world, who's shaping it? Who's making the difference? And all of these billions of dollars that are being spent, what's the influence? I love this quote from Maxine Williams, because she essentially is saying that, you know, this whole issue of diversity in the metaverse, where people are spending billions, I mean, large companies, Microsoft, other large companies are spending millions and billions, Meta, of dollars buying real estate and an imaginary place, and that you're going to be able to go in and buy clothes for your avatar, jewelry for your avatar, buildings and meeting rooms, and set up the ability to create and do presentations. This is real. This is not something that's going to happen 10, 20 years from now. You can engage in some of this right now, today. So, you know, we're like, well, what does that really mean? Because they're not doing this in my spaces right now. But if we don't understand who's shaping, who is making the rules, who is influencing the design, and does it represent me? I mean, me meaning you. Does it represent Janie and Arlene? Does it represent Mangalam? Does it represent Christy or Hyun-Yoon? Or who does it represent? Does it look like you? And is it representative of you? Well, in reality, we know that we shouldn't just be consumers. In the educational spaces, what are we doing to create new tracks for career pathing that will allow us to move beyond where we are? Because in the STEM space, we don't have enough people who are reflecting the images of those who are in represented groups. This is an issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we skill people up and create competencies, and so that the data sets that we have and the people who are involved in the coding can code in a way that's going to make a difference? What happens there? So this is a question I have for you. Do you see the avatar? How would you show up at work? If you could show up in any way, do you see yourself in this? I love that. Michael, I love that. You would show up as yourself. Anyone else? Is there anyone who would show up as someone different? I would change the color of my hair. Yes, Sarah, my authentic self. I love that. So let me tell you that I was in WhatsApp on Friday. I'm doing some work. I'm preparing to do something for the next week for the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So I was like conversing with some people who were in South Africa, and we were just having a conversation. I was like, let me put an avatar in here. And I just decided, I love the sari, but I've never had the opportunity to wear one. I put myself in a sari because I didn't know what that looked like, but I just love the look of it. I didn't have the opportunity personally myself to do that. So I got the opportunity to do that for myself, something that I couldn't physically do in the current reality, but something that I could do then. I love that you said I would change my race every day. I would look like Halle Berry. Okay, there you go. But this is what I know. Do you know that some of my colleagues who are researchers said, who are women of color, said I would make myself a white female, or I would make myself a white male. And when I said why, they said because of the advantage that it gives me in terms of privilege. And then there's some data out there, there's some research that says there are some people who are white males that are showing up now either as Black or sometimes even as Asian women, so that they can engage in conversations that they would never have an open door to, because they want to become a part of communities and influence the conversations. We don't know who's going to show up and how they're going to show up, but it's important for us to have a perspective on that and know who we are and give space to the people around us to value them. Yeah, crazy catfishing, absolutely. Give space to people to value them. So in diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is one of the things that I say when I'm facilitating the certificate program and speaking to others in many different places. Everyone wants to know that they are seen, heard, understood, and valued. Everyone wants to understand that they are seen, heard, understood, and valued. But the only way that that can happen is that there's some level of representation and visibility about those who do not have a voice. Will we be a voice for those who do not have a voice at the table? You may say, I'm not a programmer, I don't code, but what do you do? Where is the level of influence that we have, all of us? When we think about this avatar, understanding what's causing a person, because maybe it is that a person feels like they've had to code switch. Anybody know that term, code switch? Yeah, I love that. Gaining experience is great. Anybody know about code switching? Who knows about code switching? Yes, 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 right? That means that it's part of my life. In fact, it's been a part of all of my life, code switching. The way that I decide to show up with my hair, which, by the way, this is a decision I've only made in the last year, right? Because I always had to consider how I show up and whether I could wear my hair in certain ways so that I would be acceptable or accepted in environments, especially because I grew up in corporate, right? Or code switching because the language has to be something that will accommodate being fit, the ability to fit in. I had someone who was in one of my sessions. She was a refugee from Europe, and she said, I make every effort to fit in. I don't want people to know that I was a refugee. I don't want people to know that in my household we spoke a different language. I don't want people to hear my accent. So I'm very intentional about not allowing them to hear that. I need them to see me as they see themselves. That's real every day. These are the people you work with, talk with. These are the people you're in school with. These are the people who are the students coming in, because that's where they believe the privilege may exist for the next wonderful opportunity. Yeah, masking for 64 years, not showing it. That's important. So when we think about how people show up, can we give people the opportunity to show up as who they are? That's an important part. Oh, I'm sure I would love your Caribbean accent too. So when we think about this, we got to look beyond the avatar. The avatar is just the visual thing that we're seeing. But what's happening with respect to impact and creating environmental and psychologically safe environments, that's important. What's happening when we start to think about design justice? What does that mean, design justice? Who's at the table influencing the design? The research says that about 78% of those who are involved with the designing of AI are male. So I believe that people are not necessarily being intentional about bias. You know, we talk about unconscious bias all the time. And I think it's important because we have to start in a place of self-awareness and dealing with unconscious bias. But we got to go beyond that because we've been talking about unconscious bias for 50 years and it hasn't made the change that it needs to make. I'm not knocking it. It's an important step. But if we don't get to equity, the change happens in the equity. That's where we have to see the difference. So when we start to think about the narrative of someone else, who is being represented, when we talk about people of color and underrepresented populations, hey, we got to go back and look at the data sets. Who was the sampled population? And when we're buying products, to help us to hire people, and those products have embedded coding and algorithms in there, can we think about algorithmic justice as well in the design process? So are we asking those people, we may not be the coders, we may not be the technical folks, even though I'm hoping that some of you are, but can we ask the questions of the vendors? What are you doing? What's behind it? I'm certified in a lot of products that involve predictive analytics. I'm trained MAIOP psychologist. That's the work that I do. I understand the value of evidence-based research. And now I have to ask the question, tell me about the evidence. Tell me about the sample population. Tell me about the data sets. I need to dig a little bit deeper. It's not good enough for me to just take the data set and say it's okay, because the data set no longer represents people who look like me. In fact, one of the things that's very interesting is when it doesn't represent people who look like me, I cannot be seen. What did I say for DEI? We all want to be seen, heard, understood, and valued. And if you can't see me, how can you value? And this is the challenge that we have in our world. So as we move on, we think about, then if there's a design there, maybe it's going to help me to be culturally responsive. Not just culturally competent, because I got a little challenge there with cultural competence. Sometimes it can breed a little greater confidence than we ought to have. Because in reality, there are so many, for instance, dialects that if I know one language, it doesn't mean that I understand the other dialects. So what can I do to be culturally responsive? Am I constantly putting everything in English, thinking that everybody ought to get with it and understand it? Is that cultural responsiveness? Not necessarily. What is it that I need to be culturally responsive? And can I come to the table with a vision of cultural humility and all of that? What does that mean? I love this. This is one of my big things. When I talk about DE&I, I'm saying, if we're not coming to the table with cultural humility, what does that mean? I don't say that I know everything. I may have traveled the world. I may have had extensive education. I may have all kinds of alphabet soup behind my name. I may very well have even grown up in environments that were representative of underrepresented groups. But the reality of my experience may not be the reality of someone else's experience. I think about a woman that was part of a consulting gig that I had, where they were behavioral. There was a group of people who were behavioral scientists and also therapists, and they were dealing with children. And this one person said, you know, I show up and I present one way, and people think I know everything. But because she was an Indigenous person by birth, but she presented physically as white, and she spoke fluently the Indigenous language of her tribe, but she also spoke fluently Spanish. People couldn't understand, they didn't know, but she had to come to the table even as someone who was with cultural humility. People thought they understood everything about her, but they didn't. And we make assumptions about people, and we don't know everything. The work, this can save lives. I know I spent a lot of time here, but we can talk about that another time. Cultural humility has been proven to save lives. And so we think about that, and in this brave new world, this new frontier, this wild, wild west, technology and AI and alternate realities, this is a place where we just don't have the word, we don't have the rules yet. What happens when a person, in fact, is bullied in the metaverse? What happens there? Are we going to have the metaverse police come in and do something about it? Or are we going to say it's freedom of speech and everyone gets to say what they need to say? There's some psychological implications to that. There, even right now, the craziest things that I'm seeing about how people have been treated just in some of the trials by others, because let's face it, this can be used for good or not good. So what is it that we're doing to be socially responsible, to create levels of accountability, and to make sure that we've got inclusive strategies? If we look around at our groups and our teams that we're working with, what does it look like? One of the things that's important is, we talked about this, we're solving for data bias. We're solving for bias. The data's not clean. Sometimes it's clean. There's some people who are doing great jobs. And by the way, you're going to hear from some amazing speakers about some of this today. Oh my gosh. I love that people are jumping into this, but we have to ask the question, is there bias in the data? When you are buying a product that's going to help you screen for the best candidate on the basis of predictive information, what was that? Because we know that in some instances, there have been the selection of candidates and they didn't work out in this time when we need the best of candidates and retention is a real issue. We want to make sure that the algorithms that are fed by past data, you know, they're often fed by the performance of candidates who didn't look like the others. The data can be biased because who were the highest performing? Were they all white males or white females or people who didn't look like me, or were they all people of color on a certain echelon and a certain classification or category or economic environment, or people who went to certain schools? Are those the highest performers? And if in fact the algorithms are based on that, looking at the performance systems and the highest performers, then it may mean that when you scan my face for recognition, facial recognition, that you may not see Tonya Wilson as the highest of the performers in comparison to the data set that was behind that. This is now. People are using this today. It may not be for you, but if it hasn't been for you, it's coming. And if you've applied for a job, you may have seen it. I love the fact that Joy Balawini does so much work in this area. And you'll hear me talk about her again in a moment. The fact that this can limit our inclusion. This can cause lack of equity. We think about lack of equity. It can bring harm to others. When we think about what is equity, I talk about equity because some people have so many concerns about the term and the use of the term equity. When I think about equity, I'm talking about what happens for fairness and organizational justice, and access to information, and access to resources, and access to leaders, and access to projects, and access to promotions, and equitable pay. That's where the real stuff happens. How are we influencing people? So this is the challenge that we have, and these are the things that we're solving for. The Algorithmic Justice League publishes this. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I just want to tell you, when we start to look at the harm that AI can do and not looking and asking these questions, it can impact our hiring, it can impact our employment, it can impact the benefits. We already know that it impacts housing, who gets loans, and how all of that happens. It can impact all of this and result in a loss of opportunity and an economic loss and continued perpetuation of negative stereotypes. That's what can happen. And guess what? It can also lead to things happening such as misidentification for criminal behavior. When the person on the right had, some criminal behavior as a youth, but was shown as a high risk by AI, but the person on the left was shown as a low risk, and yet that person had committed armed robberies. because of AI. So there's some opportunities. It's doing a lot of great stuff. It's doing a lot of great stuff, right? So we're looking for, thank you for the explainable AI. I love that. Do no harm. That's where we're going. We want to do no harm. And yet, I just want to say that when we think about data, there was an example that Dr. LaTonya Sweeney gave in some of her research. And she says, you know, we're creating AI in our own image. She talked about autonomous vehicles. So we're driverless vehicles and some of the coding that's in there. And the discovery that because some of the facial recognition coding has difficulty really recognizing darker skin in some instances, especially for females, and there's a lot of data, you can look it up, that in fact, if a car is driving, there is the potential that they don't recognize a black person or a person of color in front of them, which means that if that coding is not there, what's the possibility that that car may not stop because they don't recognize that a person is in front of them of color? I know that sounds severe, but it has some basis in reality. So I have to think about what are the implications and what are the implications in our environments. So what are we going to do, right, when there's this illusion of ease? And I want to say that if you are, how many of you are in HR? Anybody in HR? Let me see it in the chat. If you're in HR, I just want to say some people are overwhelmed by the work and the transactional activity. So when someone says, here's a program and a system that's going to be there to help, they may say, yes, absolutely. I want that. When people are in situations where they are experiencing overwhelm and they're looking for solutions to help them to make work easier, because we embrace the convenient and we need it to be easier because we have limited resources. But we have to ask the question, what's behind the data? We have to know what's behind the data. We have to ask the questions. How do we engage in the problem solving? How do we look at predictive analysis? Those are the things we look at. But we also have to understand the stories and make space to listen to other people about how they are treated in their environments and what's working and what's not. So I want to go here. Once upon a time, we talked about families in a different way. And there was no representation of diversity in the way that we looked at the people that were in front of us on the computer screen, on the television, etc. But we have to be very intentional about the stories that we are bringing forth, transforming narratives from where they were to where they need to be. So even in our work environments, some people will look at their boards and they'll still see what you see on the left, which is some diversity with respect to gender, but not necessarily a lot of diversity. But when we bring other people to the table, when we encourage people to engage in the data coding in this work, this is what we have to consider. How diverse are our populations? Our interview processes, what does that look like? Before we embrace something that's going to use any type of facial recognition or analysis, how are we making sure that they have not embedded any type of bias on the inside of that? What are we going to do? Well, we have to bring our stories. This is where, when I'm having conversations in my consulting and my coaching and all of the work that I'm doing in the facilitation, I have these conversations, authentic conversations. Make space for people to tell our stories. Stories are transformative. When we learn about whatever the people are doing, stories are transformative. So these are some of the questions that I ask, because I'm always making sure that I create a space for people to tell their story, because it provides quantitative or qualitative data points for me to go back and say, that person said that their experience in this place was one thing, and I think it was something different. So these are questions that I ask them. Tell me about when you've experienced being treated differently. And someone said, well, that's only for people of color. I said, no, it's not. Most of the people in my sessions are not people of color. And every one of them can tell me when they were treated differently. Whether that had to do with neurodivergence, whether that had to do with positioning in their family, whether it had to do with them growing up in poverty, every one of them has a story. But what does that mean to the people that are inside the places with us? So these are questions, I put these out here because these are questions that I use in facilitation. And I don't know, seems like every time we always end up with a few tears on the table because we've made places and spaces for people to be safe to ask their questions. And these are some of the issues that I have found in the talent space. And in the talent space, I know that Rosalina, for instance, I'll just tell you that Rosalina is a key leader. She's a senior vice president in an organization, and she has been on the fast track. But really, Rosalina said to me, you know what? They've put me in all of these wonderful leadership development programs that they put together for leaders, and especially for people and women of color. And so I've gotten a promotion, but I noticed that my counterpart, John, gotten promoted 3 times since I've gotten my first promotion, or my second promotion, because she's now senior VP. And she said, John's really excelled, but he didn't have to go through 3 different leadership programs to get there. And every time they asked me to get into a different leadership program and to take on an extra role to lead some other thing, even the BRGs or ERGs, one of the things that I have found is it's telling me that I'm not enough and I'm not good enough. So what are the messages that our programming is saying when we hire people? When Sarah is saying, but I know that Joey is getting paid more than I am, so gender pay equity is still an issue. So when we think about aligning the talent strategies, we have to listen to the stories of the people that are out there, because when they do the survey, they may not answer the survey because they're not sure they trust the survey results in a way, but sometimes you got to have a conversation in a safe place. Sometimes it has to be done with a third party. We have to look at how we align the strategies. How are we going to align? This is the talent wheel. You're familiar with this. Some of you are, where we look at talent acquisition, onboarding, leadership development, career, all of this. We have to look at how we review the technology. We talked about that, how we are looking at every process. This is where equity happens. Equity happens when we examine and do an audit in each one of the spaces of our talent wheel. How are we hiring? What's the onboarding process? Are we making people not only welcome and belong, but do they know that they are being treated equitably, valued, seen, heard, understood, and valued in each one of these? Looking at the data and providing safe feedback loops. You see, it's not enough to say, oh, we have a great leadership development program, but you didn't even hear from Rosalina, who said, you've overlooked me 3 times, or the time I got promoted, there was a glass cliff situation and you didn't resource me properly, or you gave me the title, but then you didn't give me the resources to support it. Those are the questions that have to be answered, and they will come out in the stories. And then we have feedback loops that will help us to iterate. Iteration is our friend. So, you know, this woman, I just put this in here because I want you to go back and listen to some of her YouTubes and TED Talks, because the data says we've got to look at AI. We've got to look at the data behind it and understand what it is that we can do to make a difference. So let me just tell you real quickly a story. Remember that I used my Oculus to transport me? Remember that? I used my Oculus to transport me back to a place that was beautiful in South Africa. You know, digging into this means going into some uncomfortable places. And sometimes we just have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Well, this is one of these places for me. And I think about the science behind this. What's on the other side? See, I think when I think about organizational development and effectiveness and the work that we do and the importance, you can't do OD, and you absolutely cannot do diversity, equity, and inclusion without using change management principles to further it. Does anybody use change management? Do you use change management in your DEI practice? I certainly do, because I don't think equity happens until you do. Thanks, Kevin. So when we think about this, what's this picture? This is someone that I visited when I was in South Africa in Johannesburg. I was in Soweto, and South Africa is beautiful and it's amazing. But I wanted to see something that was a little bit different. I love children. And so the guide said, I'm going to take you to a little place that's off the beaten path. And I'll admit to you, when he stopped the car, had the driver stop the car, and he says, you can't drive any further because there's no road into here. You're going to have to walk. I felt a little uncomfortable. And I walked through these pathways where there were shanties, to find these children who are amazing, beautiful, amazing faces, who, by the way, may never understand or have access to the Oculus and some of the types of technology, because digital divide is still an issue. So what happens with these children who probably have the solutions and answers to some of life's most complex problems, right? I had to become uncomfortable with this to go see them. I had to be intentional. And if I can leave you with that, be intentional. Be intentional and be uncomfortable. Go into places and ask questions that people may look at you strangely and say, why are you asking that? That's not even your business. Be uncomfortable and be intentional, because the people on the other side of you and on the other side of your clients are people who need this. The only way to get to sustainability. I wrote a chapter in a book in the ATD handbook last year that was published about sustainability of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's important. We have to be courageous. We have to be okay with being uncomfortable, because otherwise I would never have seen this. So I took resources into this place for the children. What are we going to do in our spaces with our employees? Because our realities are so different. Remember when I was on the mountain? That was a reality for me, but it was never a reality for these children. In my workplaces, going into meetings, into boardrooms, influencing that, it's a reality for me. But some of the people on my team can't even see past how they're going to get through the next day and the things that are going on in their homes. We have to be real, be intentional, and be uncomfortable and be okay with that. So here's my challenge to you. It's my call to action for you. Every one of you. It's my call to action. Be intentional. Today, make a list, write down on a paper in front of you, put it in your phone. What new thing am I going to do now with respect to data and data sets? What new question am I going to ask about my environment? How am I going to make myself uncomfortable and go into places to learn things about people that I do not know and would not ever delve into because I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing? Be courageous. So what if you say the wrong thing? Oh yeah. Let's see if we can't just move a little bit past that to say, open up a grace space and let me try. That's my challenge to you. So how can you make this world better? What are you going to do differently? I want everyone to put something in the chat. Everyone to put something in the chat, unless you're driving, somebody's driving. What might you be able to do differently in navigating alternate realities? I'm open to questions. Take yourself off mute. We've got a few minutes for questions. Penny, how am I doing? I think I've got a few minutes for questions. You can take yourself off mute or you can put it in the chat. I'm looking for, see, I believe, this is what I say to people, knowledge is important, application is critical. Yeah.
Thank you for such great input this morning. I am happy that you did this. I'm happy that you talk about it, being uncomfortable. In creativity, we say change is the only constant, but change is the ones that humans avoid the most. And you know, a lot of times we think that in our idea of changing things and changing the world, we have to start somewhere else. That's not where we are standing. So I have learned in the time of doing what I'm doing to say, let me start where I stand. Let me start looking at equity, diversity, inclusion from where I stand. And for me, teaching ESL, I'm standing in the classroom. I have my students, they're coming from all over Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, elsewhere. Let me start it where I stand. And I'm seeing it, I'm using what they have to bring them into a world that they are able to understand better through their eyes, not mine. So many times as the educator, for example, we tend to want to do it through our own eyes. And I always say it's not about me. And the question is, I always ask educators, whose education is it and why? So that's another question I'm leaving with, even HR. Whose job is it and why?
Yeah. Yeah. And can we say it's everyone's job? Because I really do want to be clear that this is not HR's job. Can I tell you that I want to be really clear that diversity, equity, and inclusion is everyone's job. It is not HR's job.
That's the reason I said that.
Yeah.
I said that because, you know, sometimes in that space, we think it's HR's job, or we think it's the client's job, or we think, but it's everybody's work. It's all of us work, because if we're going to do it, it needs to be collaborative. So I'm happy that you say, let's tell our stories, or let's listen to other people's stories, because that's how I teach my students. I said, the only thing you're going to tell is your story.
Yeah.
Strong and it's powerful. Don't hide from
Yeah.
it. Tell
Very
it, because that's how people are going to understand
Yes.
how diverse you are. So they always ask me, for example, who am I?
Yeah.
And I always say, I'm Caribbean, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm a sister, I'm a mother. And I said, in my head, I have a lot of heads going on. And sometimes I just take that one person out when I need it.
That's good. That's good. Thank you so much. And I want to say, I know that Penny Ann, thank you for everything. This is how you can contact me. Please reach out. Love to have a conversation. Love to let you know more about the DEI certificate program that we've designed for talent development, and how that takes you from more about unconscious bias all the way through how to build a business case and support your strategies. I also want to acknowledge, Jasmine, your comment about everyone's job. And I just want to say, if we don't look in that wheel and create some accountability through compensation for our leaders, people do what they get measured by. And sometimes it takes an accountability that connects the pocketbook to make movement. So Penny Ann, thank you so much. Hey Penny Ann, if there are other questions that people have from this, is there a space that they can create questions and I can answer them?
Yes, we're going to have we're going to collect Q&A, and then we will post the response on our website after we would contact you for a response. So we'll guide everybody to the website then once we
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey,
And Penn,
hey.
this is Kimberly. Will the slides be available?
Yes.
Okay, I'll share the updated version for you. And hey there, I think I saw Bill there. Bill's going to have an amazing session coming up. Hi, Bill. So glad that you're here.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Wonderful presentation. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well,
Hey, listen, thanks everyone. I know you're going to the next session, but thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
It was
Have an amazing rest of your
presentation.
conference.
Yes.
Thanks for a wonderful session.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you, Tonya. That was an impressive presentation and very timely.